morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and today we are essentially finishing our look at the recently announced Pokemon TCG rotation. We've looked at all the sets that are going and what they're losing. All these videos are linked in the description. We have looked at the decks that will not survive the rotation. Today it is time to have a look at decks that will survive the rotation. But it's not quite that easy, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen. It's not actually quite that easy. You see, I'm going to go through decks today that will survive the rotation, but no one is getting out unharmed. Now, one fringe deck that I'm extremely fond of here is Obstagoon. Obstagoon's got three things I like about it. Firstly, Obstagoon itself has an attack for 2 energy that does 90 damage and protects it taking damage from basic Pokemon next turn. We're in a very basic heavy format right now. And secondly, Obstagoon's got an ability which, when you evolve into it, drops 3 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. But not to be outdone, we do of course have the Galarian Zigzagoon, who when you drop it, drops 1 damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. And this is largely staying intact, but it is losing Yveltal GX. Now this is actually a pretty big loss, because Yveltal GX for a single Darkness Energy got an instant KO on a Pokemon with 4 damage counters on. Now it was a once per game GX attack, but there wasn't any other GX attack you needed in this deck. And it sucks because it got an instant KO after 1 Zigzagoon and 1 Obstagoon ability. We're still going to have Sableye IV, and Sableye IV still does more damage, depending on how many damage counters are on the defending Pokemon. And to be fair, with 4 damage counters on, you are doing 250 damage for 2 energy, but it's not an instant one-hit KO on anything for a single energy. Now, one deck which has really come around lately, which I am a huge fan of, and we did do a video about it a week or two ago, I'll pop a link in the description, is SPIRITOMB with Arceus and Dialga and Palkia. Now, the thing is, both the main Pokemon from this deck are surviving the rotation rather nicely. ADP is obviously there for the GX attack. It lets you, for 2 energy, a metal and a water, do an extra 30 damage with all of your attacks for the rest of the game, as well as allowing you to take an extra prize every time you take a KO for the rest of the game. That's pretty good. As for SPIRITOMB, you've got an ability that puts 1 damage counter on it during your turn, and an attack that for 1 Darkness Energy does 10 damage base, plus 30 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon. It's still there, it's still good, it's still lovely. The problem is we're losing Hustle Belt. Now, Hustle Belt is a problem, because you put it on a Pokemon with 30 or less HP remaining and damage, which you're aiming to be SPIRITOMB, and then you do 60 more damage with your attacks. So you've lost a bit of damage output there. You've also lost a bit of damage output because Shrine of Punishment is rotating that put 1 damage counter on each EX and GX Pokemon between turns. And of course this is pretty gosh darned important against EX and GX heavy decks, though EXs have rotated and GXs are getting less relevant as time goes by. The other thing you're losing is Rainbow Energy. And look, we're still going to have Aurora Energy. The thing is, you didn't just want Rainbow Energy for the various typings in this deck. You wanted it because it put 1 damage counter on when you attached it, which got you rolling with SPIRITOMB much faster than you would usually. Yeah, that's kind of upsetting. Not to mention you've now only got 4 any type energy, and you do need Darkness for SPIRITOMB, but you need Water and Metal for ADP. So although this deck survives, I mean, you even keep the Jinx that you need to move damage onto SPIRITOMB, I really do think this deck becomes a lot weaker post-rotation, because you're losing some of the best ways we've got of doing extra damage. Now, one deck that does survive in printable is BLACEPHALON, as I like to call it, the baby BLACEPHALON. Now, this came out in Unbroken Bond, so it absolutely does survive the rotation. 1 fire energy, 10 damage, turn a face down prize card face up. If it's a fire energy, 60 is fine. But mostly what we want here is free fire energy. You can discard as much fire energy from your hand as you like, and do 50 more for each one discarded in this way. Discard 5 energy, do 250 damage. And the thing is, the core of this deck survives beautifully, because it is just a BLACEPHALON deck. And BLACEPHALON staying around. Cramorant V has become a really nice attacker in this particular deck, and Cramorant V survives very nicely indeed. Victini V is a good attacker in this deck. It survives. People generally play one Zacian V, that survives. It's all looking good. Now, in terms of attackers, you do actually lose BLACEPHALON GX. This is generally played as a one-of in the deck, and that's fine. It is just a giant attack once during the game with Mind Blown. Lost Zone as much fire energy attached to your Pokemon as you like, 50 for each one you Lost Zone. But then you also lose Burst GX, which was basically your only GX attack in the deck, that just let you discard a prize. It didn't take a prize per se. If it was an energy incident, you did get to attach it. But it meant if you got down to one prize remaining, you didn't have to KO anything, you just used this. But you're also losing some tricks. You're losing Fiery Flint. Now, Fiery Flint, you discard 2 cards from your hand and search your deck for 4 fire energy. And what really sucks here is that this is a deck where you want a lot of energy in your hand. You're still going to have Fiery Flint. You're still going to have Giant Half. You're still going to have energy retrieval. But you're losing Fiery Flint, and that is actually a big loss. You're also losing Heat Factory Prism Star, which can give you a little bit of extra consistency. Discard a fire energy from your hand, draw 3 cards, as well as Ultra Space, a stadium that lets you search your Ultra Beast. So, I'll be honest with you here, I love that the deck stays around, and it really does survive largely intact, but you are losing your big attacker / GX attack, and you are losing a couple of nice tricks. And while we're talking fire Pokemon, we might as well take this opportunity to chat about Reshiram and Charizard. Another deck that is surviving largely intact, because it's a Reshiram and Charizard deck. But again, you're losing those same tricks. You're losing Fiery Flint, you're losing Heat Factory Prism Star. But you're also losing Victini Prism Star, and this was a card that did see quite a bit of play in this deck. You can play it in any fire deck, obviously, but it did see a lot of play in this deck. For just 2 energy, bearing in mind you can accelerate those 2 energy using a welder, you shuffle all the fire energy from your discard pile back into your deck, and then do 20 damage for each one you shuffled back. It shuffles back any basic energy, but it was clearly going to be fire here. It's a big non-GX attacker, and you need a non-GX attacker. Speaking of which, you're also losing Turtonator, which was your other non-GX attacker. You discard any fire energy you like from your Pokemon, doing 50 more for each energy you discarded in this way. So you've basically lost your 2 non-GX attackers. Ouch. Now, it is a deck that often tends to play Jirachi as well, which means you're losing a skateboard like every deck. Doesn't mean you can't play Jirachi, but it means retreating it for free while it's asleep isn't something you're going to be able to do. Of course, Green's Exploration was for a long time played with Reshiram and Charizard, but over the past few months it really has become clear that the best version of the deck is the ability version, not the Greens version. The Greens version at least isn't losing the Jirachi option, but you are losing a couple of fire tricks along with your good non-GX attackers. There will be other non-GX attackers, don't worry your pretty little head about it, but the deck, like all of them, are a bit weaker. The fact of the matter is, there are almost no decks that don't play any cards from Team Up on. So, all decks are going to be losing something. The reality is you'll switch them round. You'll make changes to the list. My goal in this video is to show you the decks where the core of them survive, so it is very much worth having a play around to try and fix them. Now, one deck I am completely undecided about how well it's going to do post-rotation is Pikachu and Zekrom. Because you see, on the face of it, Pikachu and Zekrom is surviving quite nicely. Your main attacker there is Pikachu and Zekrom, that's surviving. The deck tends to play Raichu and Alolan Raichu, still got that. And of course nowadays you really should be playing a Tapu Koko V in the deck, and that is surviving quite nicely as well. Tapu Koko Prism Star accelerates energy, one to each of 2 bench Pokemon, and that's staying around. Dedenne is pretty key to the deck, and that's staying around. There's so much we're keeping, but there are some big losses. Zeraora GX. You see, Zeraora GX is there, well, for 2 reasons. Firstly, all your Pokemon with Lightning Energy attached get free retreat. That's a good thing. Secondly, you've got the GX attack, which you might not use because you've got Pikachu and Zekrom's awesome GX attack, but it lets you attach 5 basic energy from your discard pile to your Pokemon. And in an ideal world, you never use it, but it's there if you need that mid-game boost, or even that early-game boost. It's there as an option, so you're losing Zeraora. And in terms of Pokemon, it's only really Zeraora you're losing, although again, you are potentially playing Jirachi, so you're losing a skateboard. But as we move into the trainers, things start looking a lot less fun. You're losing Thunder Mountain Prism Star. Now, the general rule of Pika-ROM decks is this. As early as you can, preferably turn 1, Thunder Mountain to make it into a 2 energy attack, Tapu Koko to put an energy on, attach from hand and go. Now you've got a Tapu Koko and energy onto this and another Pokemon, and energy switch it over. And people generally still played energy switch in Pika-ROM decks, but if energy switch solved the problem, they wouldn't still be playing Thunder Mountain. And all of these were playing Thunder Mountain, which is a little bit upsetting. You're also losing Electro Power, which let your attacks do an extra 30 damage, which means your attacks are a little bit weaker than they were before. And you're losing Volkner that lets you search out an item card and a basic lightning energy. And losing Volkner, Electro Power and Thunder Mountain along with Zeraora, I don't know how great the deck is going to be after it. You've got to go all in on the Tapu Koko energy switch combo, which is more awkward to pull off. You lose consistency with Volkner and maybe Jirachi. And of course, you lose that opportunity to get big KOs with Electro Power, which you may have wanted to do. I mean, for me, the biggest loss here is Tapu Koko with a single Electro Power can get a 1-hit KO on a Zacian V. Without Electro Power, it can't. Speaking of which, I think the deck that really copes better than any other with the rotation is somewhat annoyingly the best deck. It's Zacian ADP. It keeps Zacian, it keeps ADP, it keeps Dedenne. It keeps most of what it needs, ladies and gentlemen. It keeps most of what it needs. Now, it does also tend to play Jirachi, so it does lose that. But honestly, as far as I'm concerned, there is one big loss. Yeah, you lose Custom Catcher, and that's a little bit sad, but you can deal without Custom Catcher. We've got other gusting options. What's really sad here is we're losing Metal Frying Pan. It's a tool that takes away your weakness. And we're still going to have Metal Goggles if you want a tool that means you take 30 less from attacks. And we're still going to have Weakness Guard Energy, which takes away your weakness. But the fact of the matter is, if we look at the top 4 of the Limitless TCG qualifier, there were 2 Zacian ADP. Neither of them played Weakness Guard Energy. And it's like I said a minute ago, if we didn't need these cards, we wouldn't be playing them. If the alternatives were better, we'd be playing the alternatives. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a pretty big loss. It means all of a sudden Zacian ADP needs to start worrying about weakness in a way that they really never needed to before. Although, let's be clear, compared to the losses we've seen from the other decks we're talking about, it's not the biggest loss ever. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the decks that are going to survive the rotation. None of them are getting out unscathed. They're all losing cards. But decks tend to adapt. Yes, new decks are going to come out because of Rebel Clash, and maybe some old beaten down decks are going to re-emerge as the metagame changes, but most of the time, what happens when the rotation hits is that decks that lost a few tricks but the core stayed together tend to rejig. New decks tend to emerge from the newer sets, and you might get the odd older deck that comes back, but most of the time, shall we say, that's the exception rather than the rule. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I think about the decks that are staying and how well they are positioned moving forward. But I would like to know what you think. So, let me know in the comment section. Go nuts. Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at The Wassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, or you can do exactly that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassyPlays, where you can find out about a whole bunch of games that don't have Pokemon in, but are pretty gosh darned awesome nonetheless. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.